Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to talk all about specifically how to help young children with OCD. So many people do not talk about the young kids with OCD. And a lot of times, mental health professionals and professionals in general will say they cannot diagnose and certainly cannot treat very young children with OCD. And to me, that's a complete shame, because in my 2 decades of private practice, I saw so many young children. I'm talking about children younger than 6. Some people think that when I'm talking about young children, I mean younger than 10. Most people know that kids younger than 10 can definitely be diagnosed and treated with OCD. But when we get into the 6 and younger, that becomes the muddy waters, where more often than not, people are told no. Well, I'm not going to tell you no. I'm going to tell you exactly what signs to look for, what approaches to take, because the younger our kids get those skills, the better their long-term prognosis. But before I get all riled up, I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside the US. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com, and I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. So let's jump into this today. I want to talk about why people think OCD can't be diagnosed at a young age. I think part of it is it's missed. It's missed a lot because it looks a bit different when kids are super young and they're not articulate enough to communicate what is happening. And so often kids are not diagnosed until they're school age. And a big part of that is because they finally tell people they're struggling, or it has gotten so bad that it's impacting their ability to go to school or to function at school, or their symptoms are just overflowing that it's impossible to ignore. And more often than not, in my therapy practice, when I've worked with kids for over 2 decades, and I would talk to an older child or a teenager, they would say to me, I remember having this particular compulsion or some version of this compulsion when I was a toddler. They'll go all the way back. And a lot of times parents would come in and they'll say, I think it's at an onset. And they'll say, this just came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden she's not able to go to school, or all of a sudden she's not able to, get out of the shower. And when we really explore it and I start talking to their child, they're like, no, I've always had some of this stuff. It just has gotten out of control. So what we see is not always what we get with our children. And I think hopefully as research continues down the road, there has not been enough research in very young children with OCD. And so it's skewed to say that onset is older than I think it actually is. And that's coming from somebody who's had a therapy practice for 2 decades and got a huge amount of very young children coming into her practice. And by her, I mean me. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that show up in toddlerhood and preschoolhood that are like little red flags or precursors to full-blown OCD. It is full-blown OCD, but it's in the toddler version of it. So the first one is a lot of rigidity. And just a caveat before I jump into this, part of the tricky issue around diagnosing young children with OCD is that there's a lot of rule outs. And so as I go through these things, I'm going to talk about some of the rule outs, because you don't get a real good, solid clinical picture for a lot of different things until kids get older. I didn't really start to fully see the diagnostic presentation of my son until he got much, much older. And then I was able to say, oh my gosh, okay, that's ADHD and that's anxiety and that's ARFID. But when they're little, first, there's so many developmentally appropriate things that can look like anxiety and OCD. And there's also other disorders and struggles that also can look like this. So I'm gonna mention that as we go through too, because it's much muddier when kids are younger. And that's partly why people have a hard time diagnosing. But I have seen a lot of kids in my practice where it was not rocket science. It was not muddy. It was very black and white. And even if it is some of the other things that I'm going to mention as we go through this, being proactive and giving our kids skills and tools can still help. And so we'll talk about that too. Okay, so the first one I had mentioned is rigidity. That's kind of that's kind of why I went off on a tangent, because rigidity could be so many different things. But what I mean when I'm talking about rigidity is this inflexibility to pivot. So they have their routine, they have the way they want things, they have a hard time taking those turns or those big changes. So for instance, maybe they like their routine. They get their red cup, they sit in the left chair, you kiss them on the left cheek, you kiss them on the right cheek. And if that routine is not happening, they can't handle it. Or you always go a certain way to daycare or to preschool. And when you make a left instead of a right, or you go to grandma's house instead of going directly home after you pick them up, they cannot handle that. No, you have to go left. We always go left. Or no, mommy, you have to say this because we always say this. Now, a big caveat for a lot of what I'm going to talk about is autism. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about could be autistic behaviors too. And there's the nuances that are hard to describe in a podcast episode as far as how to differentiate that. A lot of kids with anxiety and OCD, they don't have autistic traits. So that's the rule out too, is like they are more social. They read social cues. There is more social referencing. I mean, you can go on and on and on. And this episode isn't about that, but that's also how we kind of differentiate. Oh, they have this rigidity, but they're emotionally and socially advanced for their age. You can be academically or intelligent and off the charts that way, but that doesn't mean that you don't have autism. There's a lot of incredibly articulate, full sentence little children out there who are also autistic, but that's not what we're talking about today. I can go off on a tangent. You can also have that rigidity, and it could be anxiety. It could be trauma, but that rigidity is a red flag. Sometimes these things are red flags for OCD, but it could go either way as far as anxiety or OCD, because these can all be signs of an anxious toddler as well. And so it's hard to say until they grow a little bit older whether this is going to manifest in full-blown compulsions or it was just their way to control their environment. So rigidity is definitely number one. A second red flag is controlling other people's actions and words. This is a really big red flag. And so what I would see a lot in my practice were these do-overs where kids needed to literally, it's like if they had a remote control and they hit rewind, they wanted the whole scene to start over. So you'd be going into your car to go to school and something didn't happen the way they wanted it, and they have a meltdown. We have to do it over. Go back into the house. We have to do it over. Or you're tucking him in bed and the blanket didn't hit the right corner or something happened. And it's like, leave my room and come back in my room. Start all over. This starting all over is a big red flag. A lot of times with OCD, when kids are little, they want to control people's actions, words, and movements. Now, this is different than an autistic child who takes your hand and uses it like a tool. So there's a subtle difference, but it looks very different if you know what you're looking at. So in autistic kids, they will sometimes use your body. They'll take your hand and they'll put it on them, or they'll take your hand and they'll lead it to something that they want you to do or touch, and as if you are an extension of them or an extra tool. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about the rewinds, the redos. We have to start this all over again. Let's get back into the house and start it over again. And sometimes you have to start it over multiple times. That can be a concern. I also work with kids where they want mom to stand in a certain spot and they want you to put your hair in a certain way. And they want you to say certain words and they want to control your actions. And a lot of times those are like toddler compulsions. They want to control everything that is coming from you. And I've worked with families where the parent is literally hijacked by the child's OCD and is not able to do anything. And it's really hard too, because the child doesn't have the language or understanding of what's going on. And so the meltdowns are really severe and difficult to navigate. Another thing that you might see are strange movements. And that's across the board with OCD, is when you're looking from the outside looking in, you're not knowing why somebody is doing something and it can look really bizarre. But a lot of times people have intrusive thoughts and then compulsions that they have to move their body in certain ways. And sometimes this can look like tics, and sometimes they are tics, or sometimes there's Tourettic OCD, which is kind of a combination of tics and OCD. And sometimes it's just a pure compulsion. They have full control over their body, but they're doing it because they got an intrusive thought. And so being aware of strange movements, I've had a lot of little kids also have themes around not wanting to lose part of their body. So I've had kids who were really little who couldn't flush their pee or poop because it was a part of them. If they got their hair cut, they would want to save their hair, or their nails. If their nails were clipped, they want to save their nails because they didn't want to lose a part of who they were. I've had kids who are worried about what belonged to them and what didn't belong to them, and needed to ask all the time, is this my lunchbox? Is this my cup? Is this my shirt? Compulsively. Now, rule out with that is you have autistic kids who don't like their hair cut or they don't like their nails clipped for sensory reasons. That's different. I'm talking about people who need to, or they don't like to flush the toilet because of the sound. It's a sensory overload. That's different. We're talking about losing part of who they are. You also sometimes see precursors like hoarding. And so I've seen kids where and some of this is typical, right? A lot of toddlers are rigid. A lot of toddlers are controlling of people's actions and words. A lot of them do strange things and movements, but this is above and beyond what's your typical toddler and preschool behavior. So have that in the back of your head. But there's also kids who hoard, and a lot of toddlers like to collect little pieces of wood or trash that they see. This goes to the next level, that they can't throw anything out, that they have to save everything. Maybe they personify objects. Now, again, that also happens in autism, but I see that in OCD, where they have to collect things and hold things. They might think their stuffed animals are real, to the point where they get very upset if you leave it on the floor, or if while they're sleeping, they have to make sure how they move because they don't want to hurt the rabbit. Again, some of this is typical in toddler and preschoolers, but this is above and beyond. The acuity, the severity of it, the meltdowns around it are severe. I also see a lot of bedtime routines that are very compulsive. So no wrinkles in the bed, lining up the stuffed animals, lining up their toys. Again, the autism rule out is almost always there, but this I also see in OCD. And sometimes the bedtime routine has to be very specific. And there's some magical thinking that drives this, that if you don't do it in a certain way, something bad's going to happen. They don't have the language to articulate that, but often that's what's driving it. So you have to say, I love you too. I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you in the morning. Kiss me on the left side, kiss me on the right side, then turn off my nightlight and then say, I love you again. Then bring the dog up and then say goodnight. Very, very specific. And if you break out of that, a full-blown meltdown or panic, because that's very triggering. So those are some really common things that we want to look at. Also, repetitive behaviors. Now, repetitive behaviors, obviously, again, got to rule out the autism. And it's important to probably note that autism is a co-occurring condition to anxiety and OCD. And so it could be all three. But sometimes it's not OCD or anxiety. It's just autistic behavior. But repetitive behavior, not stimming, where you're just moving a body part to calm yourself down or jumping up and down, but doing things repetitively. So I'm going in and out of doors multiple times, or I am turning on the lights on and off multiple times. Obviously hand washing and doing grooming type of stuff repetitively. But repetition is kind of a telltale sign of a red flag for OCD. I said red flag because there's no direct causation in anything I'm saying. It can't be A plus B equals C because there are so many other factors in people's lives. And unless somebody's actually assessing your child, nobody could tell you exactly what is OCD, what is autism, unless you have a professional kind of assessing it or they get a little bit older. But those repetitive behaviors are often a red flag for why. Because with OCD, a lot of times there's this feeling of incompleteness. And so people have to keep doing it until it feels just right. Sometimes there is this feeling of, did I do it? So you have to keep checking or keep doing it again. So there are a lot of repetitions in a lot of OCD themes. And so we want to look at that with our younger kids. Then the last one, but certainly this is not an exhaustive list, is like those huge meltdowns over nonsensical things. I'm trying to give you an example. Let me think. I once had a girl in my practice that I treated, and she perseverated over getting wrinkles on her fingers or any change on her body. And so if she took a bath and she was in the water for a long time, the wrinkles on her fingers would be so upsetting, and she would have to ask her mom, is it going to be okay? It's going to be okay. It's going to go away. It's going to go away. And it could be anything on her body, anything on the mom's body. And so looking for meltdowns over really nonsensical things that go above and beyond your toddler, preschool, or nonsensical things, because sometimes they get upset about things. I know my daughter, and this wasn't an OCD thing, even though she did get diagnosed with anxiety and OCD later, but she'd want chocolate milk. And this is an example of a developmentally appropriate nonsensical thing, just to show you that not everything is OCD. She wanted chocolate milk, and she'd say, Mom, go get me chocolate milk. And then I would go pour it, and it was a glass cup, and she'd see the white, and she would have a complete fit. She'd be like, no, chocolate milk. And I'd show her the chocolate, and I'd say, I have to pour this in. And I could not rationalize or reason with her. And it got so bad that I would sneak into the cupboard. I would smuggle in the cup of white milk so I could pour the chocolate so that before she could even see it, it would be brown. It's ridiculous. But that was just a toddler thing, and she outgrew it. But when you're seeing these things that go above and beyond, that's something to do a double take. And also, if OCD runs in your family, there is a genetic component to OCD. So if OCD is rampant in your family and you're starting to see some of the things I'm talking about, it's a red flag because there is a strong genetic component to OCD. And so it's not a big leap to think, well, maybe this is happening to my child. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I want to talk about some of the approaches to take or tweak when kids are young with OCD. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers. And so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so let's talk about what you do with this. You don't have to go and get an assessment and diagnose your child with OCD. If that makes you uncomfortable, there are still things that you can do at home that are really helpful, that create flexibility, that work on that rigidity, that work on them not controlling other people's actions or words, that help give them language and understanding to what might be going on in their brain. Those can all be really helpful. In an ideal world, it is helpful to get an OCD therapist to help guide you. I do know, though, however, that it is really, really hard to find an OCD therapist that will work with kids under 6. It's really hard, but they do exist. And so definitely try them. I mean, the sponsor of this episode is No OCD. You can try them and see if they have somebody who will work with young children. But there are things that you will need to do at home, regardless of whether you are in therapy or not. The first step that I always took with kids who are very young, and that I take with older kids too, if they want it. Now, the older kids sometimes don't want this, but I think it can be very helpful if they do, is personify OCD. And so what do I mean by that? Name it. Young kids are not going to know what OCD is, and telling a 3-year-old or 4-year-old you have OCD will mean absolutely nothing to them. And so it's something that I don't even do with very little kids because they don't know what it means. It has no meaning to it, and it's not necessary. And sometimes things evolve. Sometimes it turns into autism, or sometimes it's just anxiety over time. You don't know when they're very little. But I do like to name it. And I normally like to call it Mr. Bossy. And so when we're dealing with anxiety, we call it, Mr. Worry. Mr. Worry makes you worry about this. Mr. Worry makes you that. But when it's OCD, I like Bossy because it's a very nice distinction and it helps a little kid understand OCD's bossy. Their brain is bossy. If you read an anxiety book for kids, it won't tell them that their brain is bossing them. It'll tell them about the what ifs and that they're worried about this, but OCD is not always worried about the what ifs. Sometimes it is, but you have just right OCD where it just doesn't feel right. You have disgust OCD where it just feels so overwhelmingly disgusting. There are a lot of themes. There's sensory motor OCD that involves the body and it not feeling right. There are a lot of themes that are not based in fear. And so that's why we don't want to use the word fear or scared or worried, because when it's OCD, it's not always that. The other thing that I want to mention, and there has been some research that has shown this to be true as well inside the brain, but OCD doesn't always start with an intrusive thought. And this is my biggest argument for, this is a total soapbox moment, but that's one of my big arguments against ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, is I've worked with so many very young children who did not have intrusive thoughts or feelings. They had just compulsions. The thoughts came later. The why am I doing this? Fill in the gap came after the compulsion. And I don't know if I just got a reputation for working with children, and so every young child in the Phoenix metropolitan area came to see me, but I had a huge amount of very young children in my practice for over 20 years. And more often than not, those young children only had compulsions. And interestingly, as I would follow them, because I might see somebody at 3 or 4, then I'd see them at 10 or 11 or 12 or 15, because I was in practice for so long, they would tell me that it didn't start with an intrusive thought that they were aware of, that they just felt the need to do the behavior. And so I do believe compulsions can happen first. And that is why we want to call it Mr. Bossy, because it's just a bossy brain. and not really dive too deep into the whys of why our kids are doing this when they are really little. Now, interestingly enough, I did that with my own kids. We started calling it Mr. Bossy, and my son, I believe it was my son, it gets very muddy when you start talking about 3 different kids, but my son was like, when I drew it on my whiteboard, like I would do it for other kids that I worked with, they got scared of Mr. Bossy. And they're like, that's scary. I don't want to think there's a Mr. Bossy in my brain. And, and so we started calling it Bossy Cloud. And I liked that analogy because I felt like a cloud comes and goes. You don't have to engage with a cloud. In the OCD world, a lot of therapists use cloud as a metaphor, especially in the ACT world, acceptance commitment therapy, which is a great supplement for ERP therapy, where the cloud is coming over and then it leaves. And I don't have to engage with it. And so we started calling it a Bossy Cloud. And I started using that language more in my practice, the Bossy Cloud instead of Mr. Bossy. And actually, I have a book that's coming out that came out last week, and it's called Chloe and the Bossy Cloud. I forgot the name for a second. That happens with me. And I made Chloe and the Bossy Cloud because it was actually initially called Ruby and the Bossy Cloud, and Ruby is the name of my dog. And there's like a cute little dog in this book that looks just like my Ruby, because I always like to do that. I like to do like little weird cameos in my book where like the characters look like people in my real life. But I guess there's a Ruby book. There's an anxiety book called Ruby something. And so my publisher said that we can't call it Ruby. And so it's called Chloe and the Bossy Cloud. And Chloe is the name of my oldest daughter. And I wanted to give her a shout out because my youngest daughter has been a character in several of my books. And Chloe's roommate, it's getting convoluted, but Chloe's roommate, so Chloe's 21 and she is in her last year of art school. She's in California learning to do game design and hopefully like storyboarding and creating things for game design. She's fantastic and crazy gifted. But her roommate does children's illustrations and is phenomenal. And so I said to the illustrator, she has to illustrate this book. And she did. And the images are so cute. So it is, sorry for the tangent. It is a picture book for kids from 3 to 6 years old that talks about this bossy cloud. And it just it shows them, instead of telling them, what OCD is like and how to not engage with this bossy cloud. And so it really is the culmination of me talking about this bossy cloud for 2 decades in my practice and using that as a metaphor to have this book out there. So check it out. You can actually look at it at natashadaniels.com/bossycloud. And even if you have an older kid, they might like this picture book because it's just another way to demonstrate OCD and it teaches kids how to fight back. So that could be a really helpful tool. I created it because there was literally no OCD book for young children, 3 to 6 years old, that just spoke in simple terms about OCD. They use metaphors and it's too convoluted. And they're using animals. There's a book that uses animals and it's just it doesn't pinpoint OCD in a way that's going to be helpful for 3 to 6 year olds, but I recommend it because I didn't have any other book to recommend. My workbook, Crushing OCD Workbook for Kids, that's really good for kids 6 and older. And so it was like, what about the 3 to 6 year olds? And actually, when I came out with my book, Crushing OCD Workbook for Kids, that was a big complaint I got from parents is, what about the little kids? And so I went to my publisher and I said, they had lots of ideas of other books they wanted me to do. I'm like, no, my next book has to be a children's picture book on OCD. Let's cover it all. Let's make sure that all ages are covered. So we did, and it's out. Okay, so personify it and talk about it as a bossy cloud. And then in the book, and how I taught kids in my practice is a bossy cloud are like thoughts in your brain. I don't like them to think there's actually like a cloud in their brain or there's a mist or something in their brain. So I say bossy cloud are when you get those thoughts in your head and they're super bossy. And then you give them examples. And in the book, I give a lot of examples. If it's not what's going on in their brain, they're going to look at that and be like, that's ridiculous. Most often those things are not contagious unless that theme is actually going to be in their mind anyway. And so telling them, sometimes bossy cloud will say you have to tap here 3 times, or bossy cloud will say, mommy has to stand right here, or mommy has to kiss me on my left side and my right, or, you just use it as an example based on what's going on in your child's life. And then saying, but the more you listen to the bossy cloud, the bigger the bossy cloud grows. And in the book, I actually show the cloud growing bigger. And when the cloud grows bigger, it's even more bossy. And so in the book, it shows it's starting to like boss this little girl and have her do more and more things. And in this book, I purposely picked different types of compulsions that highlighted different themes that are not normally talked about in children's books for OCD, like harm OCD and moral OCD, just right OCD, like things that are not covered. And I just give examples. The bossy cloud is telling them you might hurt your dog, or the bossy cloud is saying you need to not pet your dog, or the bossy cloud is saying you don't really love your mom. Like these are examples of harm OCD and moral OCD, and just giving them a really good example or I was going to say like buffet platter of options of how OCD can show up. Because when you're dealing with a 3 to 6 year old, OCD will morph and change. So if you are only talking to them about the bossy cloud only makes, mommy say, I love you twice before I leave your bedroom, and you think they have OCD, it could show up in a different way or in a different bossy way or a different thought. And a child who's 3 to 6 will not generalize to something else and say, oh, this must be my bossy cloud too. So the more examples you can give kids to understand the many flavors of how a bossy cloud will show up, the more they're going to be able to spot it and communicate with you as they get older. That's a bossy cloud as well. I'm doing this because bossy cloud is bothering me right now. So it gives them language. It helps them understand that the more they listen to those intrusive thoughts or those demands in their head, because like I said before, they don't always have intrusive thoughts. Sometimes it's just a demand in their head. You need to get the red cup, or you have to sit here, or that has to happen over again. There's not always a fear attached to it when they're very little. Sometimes there is, but a lot of times there isn't. But they learn in a very simplistic way, and kids are not stupid. You can teach a 3 to 6 year old that when you have those bossy cloud moments, don't listen to your bossy cloud. Now, one thing that I would do for little kids that I didn't do for older kids is I would create an opposing superhero. So I would draw on my whiteboard the Bossy Cloud or Mr. Bossy, depending on what they liked. And sometimes they would name it. And so sometimes there was a character like in Minecraft, or for the little kids, it would be, they might have like something that they don't like the Mr. Poopy Hands, or, something really stupid that like a 3 to 6 year old would say, Mr. Snot Nose, Mr. Brat, like kids would come up with all sorts of names. Sometimes I would let them name the OCD, and then I would create with them a superhero. And so sometimes it was like Super Natasha or like Super Sarah. It would just be their name. Sometimes they wanted to create a whole character that had nothing to do with them, but I liked it to be them. And I would draw them with a cape, and I would talk to them about how they're going to conquer this bossy cloud or Mr. Bossy. And the more they don't listen to the bossy cloud, the bigger and stronger their superhero version of themselves grows. This is a great art project. It's a great metaphor to keep using in your house. And it's something that I would use in my practice. And then we want to teach them, what does Mr. Bossy want you to do? Or what does Bossy Cloud tell you to do, right? Whatever name you're going to use. And really walk them through that we want to do the opposite. And so if Bossy Cloud says mommy has to kiss you on both sides of the cheek, what would be a great way to use your superhero strength and fight back? Well, how about we only kiss on one side of the cheek? Or how about we don't even kiss at all tonight? That'll really upset the Bossy Cloud and make him smaller. Some kids are extra sensitive and they don't want to be cruel to the Bossy Cloud. And so then you drop that language and you just say, we're going to make the cloud smaller, and you move the personifying of emotion away from it. Like, let's just, the cloud is raining on you, or it's really gray and we want to get rid of the cloud and we want to see the sun. So we're going to not kiss on both sides of the cheek. That'll really get that cloud going away. So you can change your language based on, because I've worked with some sensitive kids that are like, I don't want to hurt the Bossy Cloud because they're just so kind-hearted. But a lot of kids get very empowered. I had a very feisty 3-year-old, and she wanted to crush the Bossy Cloud. She wanted to fight it. Like, that was very empowering for her. So find the language that works best for you and your kids. And then we want to gamify it. And so you can offer bravery points or rewards, or have a prize a prize box. You want it to be pretty concrete for little kids, 3 to 6. So either you're doing tickets or coins or something that they can cash in pretty soon. We don't want them to accrue, like have to get 50 tickets before they can cash it in. That's too much for a little kid. It has to be pretty instantaneous. So maybe 3 tickets equals a prize from the prize box, something very simple and pretty instantly gratifying. And then you gamify it. You know what? If you can push back and not don't feed Bossy Cloud. Sometimes we talk about feeding it, like literally feeding it. You don't feed Bossy Cloud, then you can earn a ticket. Bossy Cloud wants us to redo that. It wants us to come back into the house, even though we're running late and we need to go, to pick up grandma. You can earn a ticket if you tell Bossy Cloud that he's not the boss of us. That's another thing that I like is Bossy Cloud's not the boss of us. Or if they're trying to tell you to do something, and a big part of helping our children, especially these are very young kids, is to pull back our enabling of OCD and not accommodate OCD. And that's very hard when we have a child who has limited language, limited mood regulation, and then we're pulling back what we know will give them instant calm and relief, but long-term will create a bigger mess and make this disorder a bigger problem. So the more we enable OCD, the bigger those neural pathways will grow and the stronger the disorder will become. And so we really want to learn how to pull back our enabling of OCD and sit through those meltdowns and not give in. But that does take time and one small step at a time. And so learning how to do that yourself is really important. And 3 to 6-year-olds are kind of too young for the SPACE program. I was going to tell you about Ellie Leibowitz's SPACE program, which is a parent-only approach to systematically pulling back your enabling of anxiety and OCD. But when they're 3 to 6, it's a bit trickier. Might be a helpful resource, but they don't have language, they don't have understanding. And so really it's your job to kind of just, it's like you don't give them the candy at the checkout and they're melting down. It's very similar. OCD will have a temper tantrum too. And just the language that I use for younger kids is a bit different, where I say things like, tell your Bossy Cloud that they're not the boss of me, or tell your Bossy Cloud that they don't get to boss around our house. And that is helpful to have that external personification, because you're not telling that to your little kid. You're not telling them you're not the boss of me. You don't tell me what to do. You're teaming up with your child and you're saying, tell Bossy Cloud that they're not in charge of you, or I'm not going to feed Bossy Cloud. I know Bossy Cloud's really wanting you to get me to feed him, but I'm not going to feed him right now. And if you want to drop the he and she, and you could just say, I'm not going to grow your cloud. I know your cloud is wanting to grow right now, but I'm not going to grow your cloud. So it gives you a lot of language to build your child's skills in the moment. And regardless of whether it turns out to be anxiety or autism or OCD, a lot of these skills can be good no matter what, because we want to teach flexibility. We don't want to over accommodate the rigidity to the point where they're dictating what the entire household has to do, regardless of what is causing that. That flexibility is important and helpful. But down the road, you're definitely going to want to get some sort of differential diagnosis and make sure that you rule in and rule out what is going on here. But the flexibility part is helpful no matter what. So if you want that extra tool that is finally out, I haven't even talked about it. This is only the second time I've talked about it. You can check it out at natashadaniels.com/bossycloud. It is being sold where books are sold. So you can go on Amazon, anywhere online. It should be stocked, hopefully. I am recording this in September. I'm recording this September 3rd, and it comes out September 18th. I don't know, but it is supposed to be stocked everywhere. So go and check it out. I hope that you found this podcast episode helpful, and I hope that you're finding my podcast helpful in general. And if you are, don't forget to hit a star, write a review. If you're on Spotify, you can actually write a comment right under the episode that you liked, which I did not know until last month. So I do want to thank Elsa Bell wrote, they appreciated my episode From Fixer to Anchor, a mindset shift for parents of kids with OCD. That came out August 26th, if you didn't listen to that one. And Elsa wrote, excellent, so many takeaways. Thank you so much. Thank you for writing a comment and letting me know that you enjoyed that episode. If you write a comment, I was trying to go back and make sure that I look at several episodes back so that if you write a comment, I will be able to give you a shout out and thank you for commenting on my episodes. I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.